All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's get settled. Get comfortable, grab a chair and a drink, and let's see what the night has in store tonight. Welcome back. Tonight is our third night, reading from Edgar Rice Burroughs' A Princess of Mars, the first book in the Barsoom series, an early pioneer in science fantasy? Science fiction? Pick your genre. They all kind of are the same thing. We've been over the differences, but let's be real. It's all kind of semantics, isn't it? Yeah, I thought so. So, things have gone about as well as could be expected for John, one of the most profligate Larry Stews that we've ever seen. Things, despite being in a strange situation, everything just seems to work out. He picks up the language in a matter of days. He has the superpower of being able to jump, and he's racking up a bit of a body count of supposedly the friendly locals. To be fair, they're only friendly to themselves. Exactly. If you're getting into the weeds about the difference between these two subgenres, you should be touching a different kind of weed. You know, kind that grows on the ground. It might mellow you out a little. So, let's go ahead and see what antics our protagonist can get up to tonight. Because last time we had a very misleading chapter title to end on, and, well, he said some things that probably have nuance and innuendo in the local nomenclature that will certainly come back to have consequences later, I'm sure. But seriously, if you call a woman, no matter what color she is or what planet she's from, if you call her your princess, what the fuck do you expect? Seriously, man. I don't care from what era you're from, that sort of thing has a little bit of nuance involved. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into our book and see how fantastically John can stumble over himself and still find tremendous success. Oop, I need to switch the reader over. You know what? That's fair. It doesn't matter what genre you're in, what time you're in, what culture you're from. It could be trashy romance, it could be light novels, it could be high fantasy. Men are dense. Whether that's deserved or not, I'll leave entirely up to viewer discretion. Maybe. We'll see. Alright, so let's go ahead and get back to our reading, because there is a fair bit left. We're just under halfway. There's actually more to this book than I thought there was. The very short chapters make it seem like a shorter book, but this being our third, this is probably going to look like a 5-session read or so, depending on how far we get tonight. Now, after the last chapter that ended with, that started with, oh, what was it? Making Love on Mars. A little misleading there. I'm certain this one, Chapter 14, A Duel to the Death, is probably a little more straightforward. I think. Probably. Well. Oh, that reminds me. I did not repost. I am bad at socials. Yes, I am. I guess I'm really just playing into the brand of being an old man. I'm clueless about this shit. There we go. All right. So, odds and ends done and out of the way. Stream announcements are out. Reposted the announcement for this stream. We've had our preamble. We've got a little bit of scuff out of the way because what's a stream if we don't have any? Let's go ahead. That's, you know what? Fancy that. That's about the only time I use my personal account is to repost my own announcement. I'll engage somewhat on this account because needs must do, but socials are hard, yo. I read books, all right. All right, we're gonna go way off on a tangent and find ourselves in the weeds if we let this keep going. So let's go ahead and see what we shall see with Chapter 14, A Duel to the Death. My first impulse was to tell her of my love, and then I thought of the helplessness of her position, wherein I alone could lighten the burdens of her captivity, and protect her, in my poor way, against the thousands of hereditary enemies she must face upon our arrival at Thark. I could not chance causing her additional pain or sorrow by declaring a love which, in all probability, she did not return. Should I be so indiscreet, her position would be even more unbearable than now. And the thought that she might feel that I was taking advantage of her helplessness to influence her decision was the final argument which sealed my lips. "Why are you so quiet, Dejathoris?" I asked. "Possibly you would rather return to Sola and your quarters?" "No," she murmured. "I am happy here. I do not know why it is that I should always be happy and contented with you, John Carter. A stranger are with me, yet at such times it seems that I am safe, and that, with you, I shall soon return to my father's court, and feel his strong arms about me and my mother's tears and kisses on my cheek." "Do people kiss, then, on Barsoom?" I asked, when she had explained the word she used in answer to my inquiry as to its meaning. "Parents, brothers, and sisters, yes, and," she added in a low, thoughtful tone, "lovers." "And you, Dejathoris, have parents and brothers and sisters?" "Yes." "And a lover?" My man. She was silent, nor could I venture to repeat the question. "The man of Barsoom," she finally ventured, "does not ask personal questions of women, except his mother, and the woman he has fought for, and won." "But I have fought," I started, and then I wished my tongue had been cut from my mouth. For she turned even as I caught myself and ceased, and, drawing my silks from her shoulder, she held them out to me. And without a word, and with head held high, she moved with the carriage of the queen she was toward the plaza and the doorway of her quarters. I did not attempt to follow her, other than to see that she reached the building in safety. But, directing Woola to accompany her, I turned disconsolately and entered my own house. I sat for hours cross-legged and cross-tempered, until upon my silks, meditating upon the queer freaks that chance plays upon us Poor devils of mortals. Oh, yes, yes. Queer freaks indeed. No fault of your own. No, 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 no. That'd be silly. That'd be taking responsibility for one's actions. No. No. So this was love. I had escaped it. For all the years I had roamed the 5 continents and their encircling seas. In spite of beautiful women and urging opportunity, in spite of a half-desire for love and a constant search for my ideal, it had remained for me to fall furiously and hopelessly in love with a creature from another world, of a species similar, possibly, yet not identical with mine. A woman who was hatched from an egg, and whose span of life might cover 1,000 years, whose people had strange customs and ideas, a woman whose hopes, whose pleasures, whose standards of virtue and of right and wrong might vary as greatly as mine, as did those of the Green Martians. Yes, I was a fool. I was in love. And though I was suffering the greatest misery I had ever known, I would not have had it otherwise for all the riches of Barsoom. Such is love, and such are lovers, wherever love is known. My man, if you had to go to another planet to find a soulmate, I rather think your standards might be a little out of calibration, shall we say. To me, Dejah Thoris was all that was perfect, all that was virtuous and beautiful and noble and good. I believed that from the bottom of my heart, from the depth of my soul on that night in Korat as I sat cross-legged upon my silks while the nearer moon of Barsoom raced through the western sky toward the horizon and lighted up the gold and marble and jeweled mosaics of my world-old chamber. And I believe it today, as I sit at my desk in the little study overlooking the Hudson. 20 years have intervened. For 10 of them, I lived and fought for Dejah Thoris and her people. And for 10, I have lived upon her memory. The morning of our departure for Thark dawned clear and hot, as do all Martian mornings, except for the 6 weeks when the snow melts at the poles. I sought out Dejah Thoris in the throng of departing chariots, but she turned her shoulder to me, and I could see the red blood mount to her cheek. With the foolish inconsistency of love, I held my peace when I might have pled ignorance of the nature of my offense, or at least the gravity of it, and so have effected, at worst, a half-conciliation. Oh, we have pictures in the very Pulp Fiction-y style. Yes, we're starting to see some of the green Martians who look suspiciously like... I assume it... Wait. Yeah. Look suspiciously like... Oh... Byzantine, Babylonian charioteers. That's... okay, sure. Sounds good. My duty dictated that I must see that she was comfortable, and so I glanced into her chariot and rearranged her silks and furs. In doing so, I noted with horror that she was heavily chained by one ankle to the side of the vehicle. "What does this mean?" I cried, turning to Sola. "Sarkosha thought it best," she answered, her face betokening her disapproval of the procedure. Examining the manacles, I saw that they fastened with a massive spring lock. "Where is the key, Sola? Let me have it." "Sarkosha wears it, John Cotter," she answered. I turned without further word and sought out Tars Tarkas, to whom I vehemently objected to the unnecessary humiliations and cruelties, as they seemed to my lover's eyes, that were being heaped upon Dejah Thoris. "John Carter," he answered, "if ever you and Dejah Thoris escape the Tharks, it will be upon this journey. We know that you will not go without her. You have shown yourself a mighty fighter, and we do not wish to manacle you. So we hold you both in the easiest way that will yet ensure security. I have spoken." I saw the strength of his reasoning at a flash, and knew that it was futile to appeal from his decision. but I ask that the key be taken from Sarkosia, and that she be directed to leave the prisoner alone in future. This much, Tarstarchus, you may do for me in return for the friendship that, I must confess, I feel for you. Friendship? He replied. There is no such thing, John Carter. But have your will. I shall direct that Sarkosia cease to annoy the girl, and I myself will take custody of the key. Unless you wish me to assume the responsibility, I said, smiling. He looked at me long and earnestly before he spoke. Were you to give me your word that neither you nor Deja Thoris would attempt to escape until after we have safely reached the court of Talhajus, you might have the key and throw the chains into the river Is. It were better that you held the key, Tarstarchus, I replied. He smiled and said no more. But that night, as we were making camp, I saw him unfasten Deja Thoris's fetters himself. With all his cruel ferocity and coldness, there was an undercurrent of something in Tarstarchus which he seemed ever battling to subdue. Could it be a vestige of some human instinct come back from an ancient forebear to haunt him with the horror of his people's ways? As I was approaching Deja Thoris's chariot, I passed Sarkosia, and the black, venomous look she accorded me was the sweetest balm I had felt for many hours. Lord, how she hated me. It bristled from her so palpably that one might almost have cut it with a sword. A few moments later, I saw her in deep conversation with a warrior named Zad, a big, hulking, powerful brute, but one who had never made a kill among his own chieftains, and so was still an Omad, or man with one name. He could win a second name only with the metal of some chieftain. It was this custom which entitled me to the names of either of the chieftains I had killed. In fact, some of the warriors addressed me as Dotar Sojat, a combination of the surnames of the two warrior chieftains whose metal I had taken, or, in other words, whom I had slain in fair fight. As Sarkosia talked with Zad, he cast occasional glances in my direction, while she seemed to be urging him very strongly to some action. I paid little attention to it at the time, but the next day I had good reason to recall the circumstances, and at the same time gain a slight insight into the depths of Sarkosia's hatred and the lengths to which she was capable of going to wreak her horrid vengeance on me. Deja Thoris would have none of me again on this evening, and though I spoke her name, she neither replied nor conceded by so much as the flutter of an eyelid that she realized my existence. In my extremity, I did what most other lovers would have done. I sought word from her through an intimate. In this instance it was Sola, whom I intercepted in another part of the camp. "What is the matter with Deja Thoris?" I blurted out at her. "Why will she not speak to me?" Sola seemed puzzled herself, as though such strange actions on the part of two humans were quite beyond her, as indeed they were. Poor child. "She says you have angered her, and that is all she will say, except that she is the daughter of a Jed, and the granddaughter of a Jedak, and she has been humiliated by a creature who could not polish the teeth of her grandmother's Sorak." I pondered over this report for some time, finally asking, "What might a Sorak be, Sola?" "A little animal about as big as my hand, which the Red Martian women keep to play with," explained Sola. "Not fit to polish the teeth of her grandmother's cat. I must rank pretty low in the consideration of Deja Thoris," I thought. But I could not help laughing at the strange figure of speech. So homely, and in this respect so earthly. It made me homesick, for it sounded very much like not fit to polish her shoes, and then commenced a train of thought quite new to me. I began to wonder what my people at home were doing. I had not seen them for years. There was a family of Carters in Virginia who claimed close relationship with me. I was supposed to be a great uncle or something of the kind, equally foolish. I could pass anywhere for 25 to 30 years of age, and to be a great uncle always seemed the height of incongruity. My thoughts and feelings were those of a boy. There were 2 little kiddies in the Carter family whom I had loved and who had thought there was no one on earth like Uncle Jack. I could see them just as plainly as I stood there under the moonlit skies of Barsoom, and I longed for them as I had never longed for any mortals before. By nature a wanderer, I had never known the true meaning of the word home. But the great hall of the Carters had always stood for all that the word did mean to me. And now my heart turned toward it from the cold and unfriendly peoples I had been thrown amongst. For did not even Deja Thoris despise me? I was a low creature, so low, in fact, that I was not even fit to polish the teeth of her grandmother's cat. And then my saving sense of humor came to my rescue, and, laughing, I turned into my silks and furs and slept upon the moon-haunted ground the sleep of a tired and healthy fighting man. We broke camp the next day at an early hour, and marched with only a single halt until just before dark. 2 incidents broke the tediousness of the march. About noon, we espied far to our right what was evidently an incubator, and Lorcas Tomel directed Tars Tarkas to investigate it. The latter took a dozen warriors, including myself, and we raced across the velvety carpeting of moss to the little enclosure. It was indeed an incubator, but the eggs were very small in comparison with those I had seen hatching in hours at the time of my arrival on Mars. Tars Tarkas dismounted and examined the enclosure minutely, finally announcing that it belonged to the Green Men of Warhoon, and that the cement was scarcely dry where it had been walled up. "They cannot be a day's march ahead of us," he exclaimed, the light of battle leaping to his fierce face. The work at the incubator was short indeed. The warriors tore open the entrance, and a couple of them, crawling in, soon demolished all the eggs with their short swords. Then, remounting, we dashed back to join the cavalcade. During the ride, I took occasion to ask Tars Tarkas if these Warhoons, whose eggs we had destroyed, were a smaller people than his Tharks. "I noticed that their eggs were so much smaller than those I saw hatching in your incubator," I added. He explained that the eggs had just been placed there, but like all green Martian eggs, they would grow during the 5-year period of incubation, until they obtained the size of those I had seen hatching on the day of my arrival on Barsoom. This was indeed an interesting piece of information, for it had always seemed remarkable to me that the green Martian women, large as they were, could bring forth such enormous eggs as I had seen the 4-foot infants emerging from. As a matter of fact, the new-laid egg is but little larger than an ordinary goose egg, and it does not commence to grow until subjected to the light of the sun. The chieftains have little difficulty in transporting several hundreds of them at one time from the storage vaults to the incubators. Shortly after the incident of the Warhoon eggs, we halted to rest the animals, and it was during this halt that the second of the day's interesting episodes occurred. I was engaged in changing my riding clothes from one of my thoats to the other, riding cloths, for I divided the day's work between them, when Zad approached me, and without a word struck my animal a terrific blow with his longsword. I did not need a manual of green Martian etiquette to know what reply to make, for in fact I was so wild with anger that I could scarcely refrain from drawing my pistol and shooting him down for the brute he was. But he stood waiting, with drawn longsword, and my only choice was to draw my own and meet him in a fair fight with his choice of weapons or a lesser one. This latter alternative is always permissible. Therefore, I could have used my short sword, my dagger, my hatchet, or my fists had I wished, and been entirely within my rights. But I could not use firearms or a spear, while he held only his longsword. I chose the same weapon he had drawn, because I knew he prided himself upon his ability with it, and I wished, if I worsted him at all, to do it with his own weapon. The fight that followed was a long one, and delayed the resumption of the march for an hour. The entire community surrounded us, leaving a clear space about 100 feet in diameter for our battle. Zad first attempted to rush me down as a bull might a wolf, but I was much too quick for him, and each time I sidestepped his rushes he would go lunging past me, only to receive a nick from my sword upon his arm or back. He was soon streaming blood from a half-dozen minor wounds, but I could not obtain an opening to deliver an effective thrust. Then he changed his tactics, and fighting warily and with extreme dexterity, he tried to do by science what he was unable to do by brute strength. I must admit that he was a magnificent swordsman, and had it not been for my greater endurance and the remarkable agility the lesser gravitation of Mars lent me, I might not have been able to put up the creditable fight I did against him. We circled for some time without doing much damage on either side, the long, straight, needle-like swords flashing in the sunlight and ringing out upon the stillness as they crashed together with each effective parry. Finally, Zad, realizing that he was tiring more than I, evidently decided to close in and end the battle in a final blaze of glory for himself. Just as he reached me, a blinding flash of light struck full in my eyes, so that I could not see his approach, and could only leap blindly to one side in an effort to escape, with a mighty blade that it seemed I could already feel in my vitals. I was only partially successful, as a sharp pain in my left shoulder attested, but in the sweep of my glances I sought to gain and to again locate my adversary. A sight met my astonished gaze, which paid me well for the wound the temporary blindness caused me. There, upon Dejah Thoris's chariot, stood 3 figures, for the purpose of, evidently, of witnessing the encounter above the heads of the intervening Tharks. There were Dejah Thoris, Sola, and Sarkosia, and as my fleeting glance swept over them, a little tableau was presented, which will stand graven in my memory to the day of my death. As I looked, Dejah Thoris turned upon Sarkosia with the fury of a young tigress, and struck something from her upraised hand, something which flashed in the sunlight as it spun to the ground. Then I knew what had blinded me at that crucial moment of the fight, and how Sarkosia had found a way to kill me without herself delivering the final thrust. Another thing I saw, too, which almost lost my life for me then and there, for it took my mind for the fraction of an instant entirely from my antagonist. For as Dejah Thoris struck the tiny mirror from her hand, Sarkosia, her face livid with hatred and baffled rage, whipped out her dagger and aimed a terrific blow at Dejah Thoris. And then Sola, our dear and faithful Sola, sprang between them. The last I saw was the great knife descending upon her shield and breast. My enemy had recovered from his thrust, and was making it extremely interesting for me, so I reluctantly gave my attention to the work at hand, but my mind was not upon the battle. We rushed each other furiously, time after time, till suddenly, feeling the sharp point of his sword at my breast in a thrust I could neither parry nor escape, I threw myself upon him with outstretched sword and with all the weight of my body, determined that I would not die alone if I could prevent it. I felt the steel tear into my chest. All went black before me. My head whirled in dizziness, and I felt my knees giving beneath me. All right, that brings us to the end of Chapter 14. And it didn't work out exactly as I expected. I rather expected John to bull rush his way through that duel and not have a problem whatsoever. So having some failures, even with external interference, kind of adds some depth to his character. But we'll see how much. Yeah, I was certainly expecting him to not even struggle a little, especially considering this was against a young warrior, that not one of the chieftains who are already tried and proven. He took out 2 chiefs in their own right, so they were veterans, they were ready. But no, So, let's see how it shakes out, because that was a bit of a cliffhanger there, but we have lots of time. So, continuing on with chapter 15. Sola tells me her story. Yeah, that's a good... Well, you know what? That's a dangerous way to put it, because Midwest potholes, some of those have the depths of small lakes. So, a grain of salt here. Hey there, Sar. Welcome back. Alright, so, let's continue on with chapter 15 here. When consciousness returned, and as I soon learned, I was down but a moment, I sprang quickly to my feet, searching for my sword, and there I found it, buried to the hilt in the green breast of Zad, who lay stone dead upon the ochre moss of the ancient sea bottom. As I regained my full senses, I found his weapon piercing my left breast, but only through the flesh and muscles which cover my ribs, entering near the center of my chest and coming out below the shoulder. As I had lunged, I had turned so that his sword merely passed beneath the muscles, inflicting a painful but not dangerous wound. Okay, hold on. Trying to figure out the logistics of that. I guess up high. That's... threading the needle is putting it lightly there. Removing the blade from my body, I also regained my own, and turning my back upon his ugly carcass, I moved, sick, sore, and disgusted toward the chariots which bore my retinue and my belongings. A murmur of Martian applause greeted me, but I cared not for it. Bleeding and weak, I reached my women, who, accustomed to such happenings, dressed my wounds, applying the wonderful healing and remedial agents which make only the most instantaneous of death blows fatal. Give a Martian woman a chance, and death must take a back seat. They soon had me patched up so that, except for weakness from loss of blood and a little soreness around the wound, I suffered no great distress from this thrust, which, under earthly treatment, undoubtedly would have put me flat on my back for days. As soon as they were through with me, I hastened to the chariot of Deja Thoris, where I found my poor Sola with her chest swathed in bandages, but apparently little the worse for her encounter with Sarkosia, whose dagger it seemed had struck the edge of one of Sola's metal breast ornaments, and, thus deflected, had inflicted but a slight flesh wound. As I approached, I found Deja Thoris lying prone upon her silks and furs, her lithe form racked with sobs. She did not notice my presence, nor did she hear me speaking with Sola, who was standing a short distance from the vehicle. "Is she injured?" I asked of Sola, indicating Deja Thoris by an inclination of my head. "No," she answered. "She thinks that you are dead." "And that her grandmother's cat may now have no one to polish its teeth?" I queried, smiling. "I think you wrong her, John Carter," said Sola. "I do not understand either her ways or yours. I am sure the granddaughter of 10,000 Jedaks would never grieve like this over anyone held but the highest claim upon her affections. They are a proud race, but they are just, as are all Barsoomians. And you must have hurt or wronged her grievously that she will not admit your existence living, though she mourns you dead. Tears are a strange sight upon Barsoom," she continued, "and it is difficult for me to interpret them. I have seen but 2 people weep in all my life, other than Deja Thoris. One wept from sorrow, the other from baffled rage. The first was my mother, years ago before they killed her. The other was Sarkosia, when they dragged her from me today." "Your mother!" I exclaimed. "But, Sola, you could not have known your mother, child." "But I did, and my father also," she added. "If you would like to hear the strange and un-Barsoomian story, come to my chariot tonight, John Carter, and I will tell you that of which I have never spoken in all my life before. And now the signal has been given to resume the march. You must go." "I will come tonight, Sola," I promised. "Be sure to tell Deja Thoris that I am alive and well. I shall not force myself upon her. And be sure that you do not let her know I saw her tears. If she would speak with me, I but await her command." Sola mounted the chariot, which was swinging into its place in line. I hastened to my waiting thoat and galloped to my station beside Tarstarchus, at the rear of the column. We made a most imposing and awe-inspiring spectacle as we strung out across the yellow landscape. The 250 ornate and brightly colored chariots, preceded by an advance guard of some 200 mounted warriors and chieftains riding 5 abreast and 100 yards apart, and followed by a like number in the same formation with a score or more of flankers on either side, the 50 extra mastodons, or heavy draft animals known as zitidars, and the 500 or 600 extra thoats of the warriors running loose within the yellow square formed by the surrounding warriors. The gleaming metal and jewels of the gorgeous ornaments of men and women duplicated in the trappings of the zitidars and thoats, and interspersed with the flashing colors of magnificent silks and furs and feathers, lent a barbaric splendor to the caravan, which would have turned an East Indian potentate green with envy. The enormous, broad tires of the chariots and the padded feet of the animals brought forth no sound from the moss-covered sea bottom, and so we moved in utter silence, like some huge phantasmagoria, except when the stillness was broken by the guttural growling of a goaded zitidar, or the squealing of fighting thoats. The Green Martians converse but little, and then usually in monosyllables, low and like the faint rumbling of distant thunder. We traversed a trackless waste of moss, which, bending to the pressure of broad tire or padded foot, rose up again behind us, leaving no sign that we had passed. We might indeed have been the wraiths of the departed dead upon the dead sea of that dying planet, for all the sound or sign we made in passing. It was the first march of a large body of men and animals I had ever witnessed which raised no dust and left no spoor. For there is no dust upon Mars except in the cultivated districts during the winter months, and even then, the absence of high winds renders it almost unnoticeable. Okay, but explain the spoor? You've got animal. Brother, what? We camped that night at the foot of the hills as we had been approaching for 2 days, and which marked the southern boundary of this particular sea. Our animals had been 2 days without drink, nor had they had water for nearly 2 months. Not since shortly after leaving Thark, but as Tarstarchus explained to me, they require but little, and can live almost indefinitely upon the moss which covers Barsoom, and which, he told me, holds in its tiny stems sufficient moisture to meet the limited demands of the animals. After partaking of my evening meal of cheese-like food and vegetable milk, I sought out Sola, whom I found working by the light of a torch upon some of Tarstarchus's trappings. She looked up at my approach, her face lighting with pleasure and welcome. "I am glad you came," she said. "Deja Thora sleeps, and I am lonely. Mine own people do not care for me, John Carter. I am too unlike them. It is a sad fate, since I must live my life amongst them, and I often wish that I were a true Green Martian woman, without love and without hope. But I have known love, and so I am lost. I promise to tell you my story, or rather, the story of my parents. From what I have learned of you and the ways of your people, I am sure that the tale will not seem strange to you. But among Green Martians, it has no parallel within the memory of the oldest living Thark, nor do our legends hold many similar tales. My mother was rather small, in fact, too small to be allowed the responsibilities of maternity, as our chieftains breed principally for size. She was also less cold and cruel than most Green Martian women, and caring little for their society, she often roamed the deserted avenues of Thark alone, or went and sat among the wild flowers that decked the nearby hills, thinking thoughts and wishing wishes which I believe I alone among the Tharkian women today may understand. For am I not the child of my mother? And there, among the hills, she met a young warrior, whose duty it was to guard the feeding zitidars and totes, and see that they roamed not beyond the hills. They spoke at first only of such things as interest a community of Tharks, but gradually, as they came to meet more often, and as was now quite evident to both, no longer by chance, they talked about themselves, their likes, their ambitions, and their hopes. She trusted him, and told him about the awful repugnance she felt for the cruelties of their kind, for the hideous, loveless lives they must ever lead. And then she waited for the storm of denunciation to break from his cold, hard lips. But instead, he took her in his arms and he kissed her. They kept their love a secret for 6 long years. She, my mother, was of the retinue of the great Talhashus. I'm going to reflicker it some. Seeing the quality go a little sillier. Maybe. I think we're okay. Maybe a small blip. Should be alright. They kept their love a secret for 6 long years. She, my mother, was of the retinue of the great Talhashus, while her lover was a simple warrior, wearing only his own metal. Had their defection from the traditions of the Tharks been discovered, both would have paid the penalty in the great arena before Talhashus and the assembled hordes. The egg from which I came was hidden beneath a great glass vessel upon the highest and most inaccessible of the partially ruined towers of ancient Thark. Once each year my mother visited it for 5 long years. It lay there in the process of incubation. She dared not come oftener, for in the mighty guilt of her conscience, she feared that her every move was watched. During this period, my father gained great distinction as a warrior, and had taken metal from several chieftains. His love for my mother had never diminished, and his own ambition in life was to reach a point where he might wrest the metal from Talhashus himself, and thus as ruler of the Tharks be free to claim her as his own, as well as, by the might of his power, protect the child, which otherwise would be quickly dispatched, should the truth become known. It was a wild dream, that of wresting the metal from Talhashus in 5 short years, but his advance was rapid, and he soon stood high in the councils of Thark. But one day the chance was lost forever, insofar as it could come in time to save his loved ones, for he was ordered away upon a long expedition to the ice-clad south, to make war upon the natives there and despoil them of their furs, for such is the manner of the green Barsoomian. He does not labor for what he can wrest in battle from others. He was gone for 4 years, and when he returned, all had been over for 3, for about a year after his departure, and shortly before the time for the return of an expedition which had gone forth to fetch the fruits of a community incubator. The egg had hatched. Thereafter my mother continued to keep me in the old tower, visiting me nightly, and lavishing upon me the love the community life would have robbed us both of. She hoped, upon the return of the expedition from the incubator, to mix me with the other young assigned to the quarters of Talhashus, and thus escape the fate which would surely follow discovery of her sin against the ancient traditions of the green men. She taught me rapidly the language and customs of my kind, and one night she told me the story I have told you up to this point, impressing upon me the necessity for absolute secrecy, and the great caution I must exercise after she had placed me with the other young Tharks to permit no one to guess that I was further advanced in education than they, nor by any sign to divulge in the presence of others my affection for her, or my knowledge of my parentage. And then, drawing me close to her, she whispered in my ear the name of my father. And then a light flashed out upon the darkness of the tower chamber, and there stood Sarkosia, her gleaming, baleful eyes fixed in a frenzy of loathing and contempt upon my mother. The torrent of hatred and abuse she poured out upon her turned my young heart cold in terror. That she had heard the entire story was apparent, and that she had suspected something wrong from my mother's long nightly absences from her quarters accounted for her presence there on that fateful night. One thing she had not heard, nor did she know, the whispered name of my father. It was apparent from her repeated demands upon my mother to disclose the name of her partner in sin. But no amount of abuse or threats could wring this from her, and to save me from the needless torture she lied, for she told Sarkosia that she alone knew, nor would she ever tell her child. With final imprecations, Sarkosia hastened away to tell Talhajas to report her discovery, and while she was gone, my mother, wrapping me in the silks and furs of her night coverings so that I was scarcely noticeable, descended to the streets and ran wildly away toward the outskirts of the city, in the direction which led to the far south, out toward the man whose protection she might not claim, but on whose face she wished to look once more before she died. As we neared the city's southern extremity, a sound came to us from across the mossy flat, from the direction of the only pass through the hills which led to the gates, the pass by which caravans from either north or south or east or west would enter the city. The sounds we heard were the squealing of thoats and the grumbling of zitadars, with the occasional clank of arms which announced the approach of a body of warriors. The thought uppermost in her mind was that it was my father returning from his expedition, but the cunning of the Thark held her from headlong and precipitate flight to greet him. Retreating into the shadows of a doorway, she awaited the coming of the cavalcade, which shortly entered the avenue, breaking its formation and thronging the thoroughfare from wall to wall. As the head of the procession passed us, the lesser moon swung clear of the overhanging roofs and lit up the scene with all the brilliancy of her wondrous light. My mother shrank further back into the friendly shadows, and from her hiding place saw that the expedition was not that of my father, but the returning caravan bearing the young Tharks. Instantly, her plan was formed, and as a great chariot swung close to our hiding place, she slipped stealthily in upon the trailing tailboard, crouching low in the shadow of the high side, straining me to her bosom in a frenzy of love. She knew what I did not, that never again, after that night, would she hold me to her breast, nor was it likely we would ever look upon each other's face again. In the confusion of the plaza, she mixed me with the other children, whose guardians during the journey were now free to relinquish their responsibility. We were herded together into a great room fed by women who had not accompanied the expedition, and the next day we were parceled out among the retinues of the chieftains. I never saw my mother after that night. She was imprisoned by Talhajas, and every effort, including the most horrible and shameful torture, was brought to bear upon her to wring from her lips the name of my father. But she remained steadfast and loyal, dying at last amidst the laughter of Talhajas and his chieftains during some awful torture she was undergoing. I learned afterwards that she told them that she had killed me to save me from a like fate at their hands, and that she had thrown my body to the white apes. Sarkosia alone disbelieved her, and I feel to this day that she suspects my true origin, but does not dare expose me, at present, at all events, because she also guesses, I am sure, the identity of my father. When he returned from his expedition and learned the story of my mother's fate, I was present, as Talhajas told him, but never by the quiver of a muscle did he betray the slightest emotion. Only he did not laugh as Talhajas gleefully described her death struggles. From that moment on, he was the cruelest of the cruel, and I am awaiting the day when he shall win the goal of his ambition and feel the carcass of Talhajas beneath his foot, for I am as sure that he but waits the opportunity to wreak a terrible vengeance, and that his great love is as strong in his breast as when it first transfigured him nearly 40 years ago, as I am that we sit here upon the edge of a world-old ocean, while sensible people sleep, John Carter. And your father, Sola, is he with us now? I asked. Yes, she replied, but he does not know me for what I am, nor does he know who betrayed my mother to Talhajas. I alone know my father's name, and only I and Talhajas and Sarkosia know that it was she who carried the tale that brought death and torture upon her he loved. We sat silent for a few moments, she wrapped in the gloomy thoughts of her terrible past, and I in pity for the poor creatures whom the heartless, senseless customs of their race had doomed to loveless lives of cruelty and hate. Presently, she spoke. John Carter, if ever a real man walked the cold, dead bosom of Barsoom, you are one. I know that I can trust you, and because the knowledge may someday help you, or him, or Dejathoris, or myself, I am going to tell you the name of my father, nor place any restrictions or conditions upon your tongue. When the time comes, speak the truth if it seems best to you. I trust you because I know that you are not cursed with the terrible trait of absolute and unswerving truthfulness, that you could lie, like one of your own Virginia gentlemen, if a lie would save others from sorrow or suffering. My father's name is Tars Tarkas. Dun dun dun. Not actually surprised, but it is a telling connection now. Sola was serving Tars Tarkas and among the retinue, and was serving aside Sarkosia, who is one of Tars's women, and yeah, is a tangled web woven on Mars. Alright, so our next chapter is a touch longer. So, we're going to take a break before that, but let's take a few minutes and we can, unpack that. Because yes, the story of her mother explains so much about her, you're right. She's very different. We talked about it earlier, she's sort of playing into the trope of the noble savage from, well, she and Tars Tarkas together play into that trope. From two different perspectives. She's the soft and understanding, and he is the fighting against his nature to be something better from the perspective of the narrator. So together they're filling out that trope. It's a very early 1900s sort of idea, and it plays out reasonably well here. It's put together well. It has implications, but we're not here to judge. It's been over 100 years. That's we don't judge. We just take in and see and unpack. But it does strengthen Sola as a character. It explains a lot about her, because it was kind of strange that she was just so different from all the other Martians that we'd seen. And Tars Tarkas is also different in a slightly different way. Although it seems he's not as different as Sola is. He still fits in. He's strong in his own way, and he stands apart, but also he can fit in well. But also it seems that the Jed, I forget what his name was, but the chieftain of this cavalcade, also has some of those same misgivings. Because if you remember, when Dejathoris was giving her speech, the two of them, the two most important people in the room, were hesitating. Were on the edge of having a breakthrough of their own when the second of John's victims was so precipitously interrupting. So, Tars Tarkas is not unique, I think, in having the makings of higher sentiment, but is probably the closest in being ready to accept those sentiments. Meanwhile, Sola is very unique from what we've seen, although we have only seen a couple women given full characters. There's Sarkosia, who is just the worst. Not only is she just like true to the Green Martian way, but she's also just mean. So it's sort of intentionally painting her in a poor light. Because the other women could very well still be they're cold and detached, and aggressive, but not mean in the same way that Sarkosia is. So, she's just kind of one of those. But she, as a contrast and a foil to Sola, it's powerful. And the linkage from Sarkosia to Sola's mother, and the linkage to her father, is very twisty. So, we'll have to see how this tangled knot gets unraveled. Probably in the method of Alexander and the knot of Gordius, I'm imagining. So, that could be satisfying too. Just taking the straight and to the point method of problem solving. All right, let's go ahead and take a short break. We're going to top up our drinks, stretch our legs, and we'll be back in just a few minutes where we'll continue and see how things start to shape up. We are just north of the 50% mark through the book, so things are probably going to start getting more interesting. We're well past the world building phase and into the action phase of the book. All right, we are back. So, we've seen a peek behind the curtain at Sola's character. Not only a little explanation of why she's been so kind and accepting to John, who is very, very strange by her reckoning. He's had some acceptance from the men Martians because he's racking up a body count. That's just what they respect. But Sola's just been kind. Meanwhile, we saw the battle between Sarkozia's proxy and John, which ended less one-sidedly than we expected, but still, the end result is it was expected. So, let's go ahead and start delving into what will come next. And if the title of this chapter is any indication, it sounds like John and Deja will be back on speaking terms. Alright. So, continuing with Chapter 16. We plan our escape. The remainder of our journey to Thark was uneventful. We were 20 days upon the road, crossing 2 sea bottoms and passing through or around a number of ruined cities. Mostly smaller than Korad. Twice we crossed the famous Martian waterways, or canals, so called by our earthly astronomers. Remember, early 1900s-ish, people actually thought there were waterways and canals on Mars through a quirk of early astronomy tools. When we approached these points, a warrior would be sent... Nope, hang on. Nope, I would rather not buy followers. Thank you very much. That's a ban. Goodbye. I'm surprised that didn't get auto-modded. Ah, well. When we approached these points, a warrior would be sent far ahead with a powerful field glass, and if no great body of Red Martian troops was in sight, we would advance as close as possible without chance of being seen, and then camp until dark, when we would slowly approach the cultivated tract and, locating one of the numerous broad highways which crossed these areas at regular intervals, creep silently and stealthily across to the arid lands upon the other side. It required 5 hours to make one of these crossings without a single halt, and the other consumed the entire night, so that we were just leaving the confines of the high-walled fields when the sun broke out upon us. Crossing in the darkness, as we did, I was unable to see but little, except as the nearer moon, in her wild and ceaseless hurtling through the Barsoomian heavens, lit up little patches of the landscape from time to time, disclosing walled fields and low, rambling buildings, presenting much the appearance of earthly farms. There were many trees, methodically arranged, and some of them were of enormous height. There were animals in some of the enclosures, and they announced their presence by terrified squealings and snortings, as they scented out queer wild beasts and wilder human beings. Only once did I perceive a human being, and that was at the intersection of our crossroad with the wide white turnpike, which cuts each cultivated district longitudinally at its exact center. The fellow must have been sleeping beside the road, for as I came abreast of him, he raised up upon one elbow, and after a single glance at the approaching caravan, leaped shrieking to his feet and fled madly down the road, scaling a nearby wall with the agility of a scared cat. The Tharks paid him not the slightest attention. They were not out upon the warpath, and the only sign that I had that they had seen him was a quickening of the pace of the caravan as we hastened toward the bordering desert, which marked our entrance into the realm of Talhajas. Not once did I have speech with Dejathoris. She sent no word to me that I would be welcome in her chariot, and my foolish pride kept me from making any advances. I verily believe that a man's way with women is an inverse ratio to his prowess among men. Yeah, sure. The weakling and the saphead often have great ability to charm the fair sex, while the fighting man who can face 1,000 real dangers unafraid sits hiding in the shadows like some frightened child. Are we sure this isn't a Henry? John Henry? Well, no, John Henry was awesome, but starting to give me some, starting to have me cast dispersions here, John Carter. Just 30 days after my advent upon Barsoom, we entered the ancient city of Thark, from whose long-forgotten people this horde of green men have stolen even their name. The hordes of Thark number some 30,000 souls, and are divided into 25 communities. Each community has its own Jed and lesser chieftains, but all are under the rule of Talhashis, Jedak of Thark. 5 communities make their headquarters at the city of Thark, and the balance are scattered among the deserted cities of ancient Mars throughout the district claimed by Talhashis. We made our entry into the great central plaza early in the afternoon. There were no enthusiastic, friendly greetings for the return expedition. Those who chanced to be in sight spoke the names of warriors or women with whom they came in direct contact, in the formal greeting of their kind, but when it was discovered that they brought 2 captives, a greater interest was aroused, and Dejathoris and I were the centers of inquiring groups. We were soon assigned to new quarters, and the balance of the day was devoted to setting ourselves to the changed conditions. My home was now upon an avenue leading into the plaza from the south, the main artery down which we had marched from the gates of the city. I was at the far end of the square, and had an entire building to myself. The same grandeur of architecture which was so noticeable a characteristic of Korad was in evidence here, only, if that were possible, on a larger and richer scale. My quarters would have been sustainable for housing the greatest of earthly emperors, but to these queer creatures, nothing about a building appealed to them, but its size and the enormity of its chambers. The larger the building, the more desirable. And so, Talhashis occupied what must have been an enormous public building, the largest in the city, but entirely unfitted for residence purposes. The next largest was reserved for Lorcus Tamel, the next for the Jed of a lesser rank, and so on to the bottom of the list of the 5 Jeds. The warriors occupied the buildings with the chieftains to whose retinues they belonged, or, if they preferred, sought shelter among any of the thousands of untenanted buildings in their own quarters of town, each community being assigned a certain section of the city. The selection of building had to be made in accordance with these divisions, except in so far as the Jeds were concerned, they all occupying edifices which fronted upon the plaza. When I had finally put my house in order, or rather, seen that it had been done, it was nearing sunset, and I hastened out with the intention of locating Sola and her charges. As I had determined upon having speech with Dejathoris, and trying to impress on her the necessity of our at least patching up a truce until I could find some way of aiding her to escape, I searched in vain until the upper rim of the great red sun was just disappearing behind the horizon. Hang on, I'm getting a call. 1 second. Hey. Not one thing, it's another, huh? Alright, so. Alright. I searched in vain until the upper rim of the great red sun was just disappearing behind the horizon, and then I spied the ugly head of Woola, peering from a second-story window on the opposite side of the very street where I was quartered, but near the plaza. Oh yeah, everything's fine. We've got some weather coming up, but it was family being paranoid and checking. And like, it's a thunderstorm, whatever. In very Midwestern fashion, I will sit in the garage and watch a tornado come along. Alright. Yeah, exactly. Without waiting for a further invitation, I bolted up the winding runway which led to the second floor, and, entering a great chamber at the front of the building, was greeted by the frenzied Woola, who threw his great carcass upon me, nearly hurling me to the floor. The poor old fellow was so glad to see me that I thought he would devour me. His head split from ear to ear, showing his 3 rows of tusks in his hobgoblin smile. Quieting him with a word of command and a caress, I looked hurriedly through the approaching gloom for a sign of Deja Thoris, and then, not seeing her, I called her name. There was an answering murmur from the far corner of the apartment, and with a couple of quick strides I was standing beside her where she crouched among the furs and silks upon an ancient carved wooden seat. As I waited, she rose to her full height and, looking me straight in the eye, said, "What would Dotar Sojat, Tharp of Deja Thoris, his captive?" Yeah, one of my core early memories was tornado sirens going off and weather thing going on, and we'd pack up the family, get out of the trailer, walk over to the nearest ditch, and just lay in the ditch for a little while. Yeah, that was how you dealt with tornado weather when you're in the more vulnerable sort of housing. Deja Thoris, I do not know how I have angered you. It was furthest from my desire to hurt or offend you, whom I had hoped to protect and comfort. Have none of me if it is your will, but that you must aid me in effecting your escape, if such a thing be possible, is not my request but my command. When you are free, and when you are safe once more at your father's court, you may do with me as you please. But from now on, until that day, I am your master, and you must obey and aid me. Alright, the Henry vibes? Intensifying just a little bit. She looked at me long and earnestly, and I thought that she was softening toward me. Girl, do not. Do not. I understand your words, Dotar Sojat, she replied. But you I do not understand. You are a queer mixture of child and man, of brute and noble. I only wish that I might read your heart. Look down at your feet, Deja Thoris. It lies there now where it has lain since that other night at Korad, and where it will ever lie, beating, alone, for you, until death stills it forever. She took a little step toward me, her beautiful hands outstretched in a strange, groping gesture. What do you mean, John Carter? She whispered. What are you saying to me? I am saying what I had promised myself that I would not say to you, at least until you were no longer a captive among the green men. Dude! You are so right. He absolutely is a Barsumaboo? Marsaboo? He's gone not quite full native, but at least for this group of Martians. But in general, he's just, yeah, you know what? That makes so much sense. Makes so much sense. I am saying what I had promised myself that I would not say to you, at least until you were no longer a captive among the green men. What from your attitude toward me for the past 20 days I had thought never to say to you. I am saying, Dejathorus, that I am yours, body and soul, to serve you, to fight for you, and to die for you. Only one thing I ask of you in return is that you make no sign, either condemnation or approbation of my words, until you are safe among your own people. That whatever sentiments you harbor toward me, they be not influenced or colored by gratitude. Whatever I may do to serve you will be prompted solely from selfish motives, since it gives me more pleasure to serve you than not. I will respect your wishes, John Carter, because I understand the motives which prompt them, and I accept your service no more willingly than I bow to your authority. Your word shall be my law. I have twice wronged you in my thoughts, and again I ask your forgiveness. A further conversation of a personal nature was prevented by the entrance of Sola, who was much agitated, and wholly unlike her usual calm and possessed self. That horrible Sarkoja has been before Tallahassee, she cried, and from what I heard upon the plaza, there is little hope for either of you. What do they say? Inquired Dejathorus. That you will be thrown to the wild calots, the dogs, in the great arena as soon as the hordes have assembled for the yearly games. Sola, I said, you are a Thark, but you hate and loathe the customs of your people as much as we do. Will you not accompany us in one supreme effort to escape? I am sure that Dejathorus can offer you a home and protection among her people, and your fate can be no worse among them than it must ever be here. Yes, cried Dejathorus. Come with us, Sola. You will be better off among the red men of Helium than you are here, and I can promise you not only a home with us, but the love and affection your nature craves, and which must always be denied you by the customs of your own race. Come with us, Sola. We might go without you, but your fate would be terrible if they thought you had connived to aid us. I know that even that fear would not tempt you to interfere in our escape, but we want you with us. We want you to come to a land of sunshine and happiness, amongst a people who know the meaning of love, of sympathy, and of gratitude. Say that you will, Sola. Tell me that you will. The great waterway, which leads to Helium, is but 50 miles to the south, murmured Sola half to herself. A swift boat might make it in 3 hours, and then to Helium it is 500 miles, most of the way through thinly settled districts. They would know, and they would follow us. We might hide among the great trees for a time, but the chances are small indeed for escape. They would follow us to the very gates of Helium, and they would take toll of life at every step. You do not know them. Is there no other way we might reach Helium? I asked. Can you not draw me a rough map of the country we must traverse, Dejathorus? Yes, she replied, and taking a great diamond from her hair, she drew upon the marble floor the first map of Barsumian territory I had ever seen. It was crisscrossed in every direction with long straight lines, sometimes running parallel and sometimes converging towards some great circle. The lines, she said, were waterways, the circles cities, and one, far to the northwest of us, she pointed out as Helium. There were other cities closer, but she said she feared to enter many of them, as they were not all friendly toward Helium. Was it strictly necessary to use a diamond to carve a map into the marble floor. Excuse me? Is there not, some easier way to go about this? I'm sure it adds a layer of juxtaposition of doing something so simple with so fine materials, but come on. Finally, after studying the map carefully in the moonlight, which now flooded the room, I pointed out a waterway, far to the north of us, which also seemed to lead to helium. Does this not pierce your grandfather's territory? I asked. Yes, she answered, but it is 200 miles north of us. It is one of the waterways we crossed on the trip to Thark. They would never suspect that we would try for that distant waterway, I answered. And that is why I think that it is the best route for our escape. Sola agreed with me, and it was decided that we should leave Thark that same night, just as quickly, in fact, as I could find and saddle my thoats. Sola was to ride one, and Deja Thoris and I the other, each of us carrying sufficient food and drink to last us for 2 days, since the animals could not be urged too rapidly for so long a distance. I directed Sola to proceed with Deja Thoris along one of the less frequented avenues, to the southern boundary of the city, where I would overtake them with the thoats as quickly as possible. Then, leaving them to gather what food, silks, and furs we were to need, I slipped quietly to the rear of the first floor and entered the courtyard, where our animals were moving restlessly about, as was their habit, before settling down for the night. In the shadows of the buildings, and out beneath the radiance of the Martian moons, moved the great herd of thoats and zitidars. The latter grunting their low gutturals, and the former occasionally emitting the sharp squeal that denotes the almost habitual state of rage in which these creatures passed their existence. They were quieter now, owing to the absence of man, but as they scented me, they became more restless, and their hideous noise increased. It was risky business, this entering a paddock of thoats alone at night. First, because their increasing noisiness might warn the nearby warriors that something was amiss. And also, because for the slightest cause, or for no cause at all, some great bull thoat might take it upon himself to lead a charge upon me. Having no desire to awaken their nasty tempers upon such a night as this, where so much depended upon secrecy and dispatch, I hugged the shadows of the buildings, ready at an instant's warning to leap into the safety of a nearby door or window. Thus I moved silently to the great gates which opened upon the street at the back of the court, and as I neared the exit I called softly to my 2 animals. How I thanked the kind Providence which had given me the foresight to win the love and confidence of these wild, dumb brutes. Presently, from the far side of the court, I saw 2 huge bulks forcing their way toward me through the surging mountains of flesh. They came quite close to me, rubbing their muzzles against my body and nosing for the bits of food it was always my practice to reward them with. Opening the gates, I ordered the 2 great beasts to pass out, and then, slipping quietly after them, I closed the portals behind me. I did not saddle or mount the animals there, but instead walked quietly in the shadows of the buildings toward an unfrequented avenue, which led toward the point I had arranged to meet Deja and Thoris and Sola. With the noiselessness of disembodied spirits, we moved stealthily among the deserted streets, but not until we were within sight of the plain beyond the city did I commence to breathe freely, I was sure that Sola and Deja Thoris would find no difficulty in reaching our rendezvous undetected. But with my great thoughts, I was not so sure for myself, as it was quite unusual for warriors to leave the city after dark. In fact, there was no place for them to go within any but a long ride. I reached the appointed meeting place safely, but as Deja, Thoris, and Sola were not there, I led my animals into the entrance hall of one of the large buildings, presuming that one of the other women of the same household may have come in to speak to Sola, and so delayed their departure. I did not feel any undue apprehension until nearly an hour had passed without a sign of them, and by the time another half hour had crawled away, I was becoming filled with grave anxiety. Then there broke upon the stillness of the night the sound of an approaching party, which, from the noise, I knew could be no fugitives creeping stealthily toward liberty. Soon the party was near me, and from the black shadows of my entranceway, I perceived a score of mounted warriors, who, in passing, dropped a dozen words that fetched my heart clean into the top of my head. We would likely have arranged to meet them just without the city, and so I heard no more. They had passed on, but it was enough. Our plan had been discovered, and the chances for escape from now on to the fearful end would be small indeed. My one hope now was to return undetected to the quarters of Deja Thoris and learn what fate had overtaken her. But how to do it with these great monstrous thoats upon my hands, now that the city probably was aroused by the knowledge of my escape, was a problem of no mean proportions. Suddenly, an idea occurred to me, and acting on my knowledge of the construction of the buildings of these ancient Martian cities, with a hollow court within the center of each square, I groped my way blindly through the dark chambers, calling the great thoats after me. They had difficulty in negotiating some of the doorways, but as the buildings fronting the city's principal exposures were all designed upon a magnificent scale, they were able to wriggle through without sticking fast. And thus we finally made the inner court, where I found, as I had expected, the usual carpet of moss-like vegetation, which would provide their food and drink until I could return them to their own enclosure. That they would be as quiet and contented here as elsewhere, I was confident. Nor was there but the remotest possibility that they would be discovered, as the green men had no great desire to enter these outlying buildings, which were frequented by the only thing, I believe, which caused them the sensation of fear, the great white apes of Barsoom. Removing the saddle trappings, I hid them just within the rear doorway of the building, through which we had entered the court, and, turning the beasts loose, I quickly made my way across the court to the rear of the buildings, upon the further side, and thence to the avenue beyond, waiting in the doorway of the building until I was assured that no one was approaching. I hurried across to the opposite side and through the first doorway to the court beyond, thus crossing through court after court with only the slight chance of detection which the necessary crossing of the avenues entailed. I made my way in safety to the courtyard in the rear of Deja Thoris's quarters. Here, of course, I found the beasts of the warriors who quartered in the adjacent buildings, and the warriors themselves I might expect meet within if I entered. But fortunately for me, I had another and safer method of reaching the upper story where Deja Thoris should be found. And after first determining as nearly as possible which of the buildings she occupied, for I had never observed them before from the court side, I took advantage of my relatively great strength and agility and sprang upward until I grasped the sill of a second-story window, which I thought to be in the rear of her apartment. Drawing myself inside the room, I moved stealthily toward the front of the building, and not until I had quite reached the doorway of her room was I made aware by voices that it was occupied. I did not rush headlong in, but listened without, to assure myself that it was Deja Thoris, and that it was safe to venture within. It was well indeed that I took this precaution, for the conversation I heard was in the low gutturals of men, and the words which finally came to me proved a most timely warning. The speaker was a chieftain, and he was giving orders to 4 of his warriors.
When does he return to this chamber? And when he returns to this chamber, he was saying, as he surely will when he finds she does not meet him at the city's edge, you 4 are to spring upon him and disarm him. It will require the combined strength of all of you to do it, if the reports they bring back from Colorado are correct. And then, when you have him fast bound, bear him to the vaults beneath the Jedak's quarters, and chain him securely, where he may be found when Talhajas wishes him. Allow him to speak with none, nor permit any other to enter this apartment before he comes. There will be no danger of the girl returning, for by this time she is safe in the arms of Talhajas, and may all her ancestors have pity upon her, for Talhajas will have none. The great Sarkoja has done a noble knight's work. I go, and if you fail to capture him when he comes, I commend your carcasses to the cold bosom of Is.
Well then, as expected, things didn't go according to plan. Funny how that works out. So, that brings us to chapter 17. So, the 2 women that he seems to have been taken with here on Mars, the only people, well, I won't say the only people that he cares for, but the very small number that he does, have been, at least one, been taken captive. The other he has no idea. But it's reasonably safe to assume that if Sarkoja betrayed the plan to the authorities and got Deja captured, then it's a good chance that Sola is also in trouble. So, let's continue on and see what will come of this daring escapade, and maybe rescue, maybe not, as we continue on with Chapter 17, a costly recapture. As the speaker ceased, he turned to leave the apartment by the door where I was standing, but I needed to wait no longer. I had heard enough to fill my soul with dread, and stealing quietly away, I returned to the courtyard by the way I had come. My plan of action was formed upon the instant, and crossing the square and bordering avenue upon the opposite side, I soon stood within the courtyard of Talhajas. The brilliantly lighted apartments of the first floor told me where first to seek, and advancing to the windows I peered within. I soon discovered that my approach was not to be the easy thing I had hoped, for the rear rooms bordering the court were filled with warriors and women. I then glanced up at the stories above, discovering that the third was apparently unlighted, and so decided to make my entrance to the building from that point. It was the work of but a moment for me to reach the windows above, and soon I had drawn myself within the sheltering shadows of the unlighted third floor. Fortunately, the room I had selected was untenanted, and creeping noiselessly to the corridor beyond, I discovered a light in the apartments ahead of me. Reaching what appeared to be a doorway, I discovered that it was but an opening to an immense inner chamber, which towered from the first floor 2 stories below me to the dome-like roof of the building, high above my head. The floor of this great circular hall was thronged with chieftains, warriors, and women, and at one end was a great raised platform upon which squatted the most hideous beast I had ever put my eyes upon. He had all the cold, hard, cruel, terrible features of the Green Warriors, but accentuated and debased by the animal passions to which he had given himself over for many years. There was not a mark of dignity or pride upon his bestial countenance, while his enormous bulk spread itself out upon the platform where he squatted like some huge devilfish, his 6 limbs accentuating the similarity in a horrible and startling manner. But the sight that froze me with apprehension was that of Dejathoris and Sola standing there before him, and the fiendish leer of him as he let his great protruding eyes gloat upon the lines of her beautiful figure. She was speaking, but I could not hear what she said, nor could I make out the low grumbling of his reply. She stood there erect before him, her head held high, and even at the distance I was from them, I could read the scorn and disgust upon her face as she let her haughty glance rest without sign of fear upon him. She was indeed the proud daughter of 1,000 Jedaks. Every inch of her dear, precious little body, so small, so frail beside the towering warriors around her, but in her majesty, dwarfing them into insignificance. She was the mightiest figure among them, and I verily believe they felt it. Presently, Talhajas made a sign that the chamber was to be cleared, and that the prisoners be left alone before him. Slowly, the chieftains, the warriors, and the women melted away into the shadows of the surrounding chambers, and Dejathoris and Sola stood alone before the Jedak of the Tharks. One chieftain alone had hesitated before departing, but I saw him standing in the shadows of a mighty column, his fingers nervously toying with the hilt of his greatsword, and his cruel eyes bent in implacable hatred upon Talhajas. It was Tars Tarkas, and I could read his thoughts as they were an open book, with the undisguised loathing upon his face. He was thinking of that other woman who 40 years ago had stood before this beast, and could I have spoken a word into his ear at that moment, the reign of Talhajas would have been over. But finally, he also strode from the room, not knowing that he left his own daughter at the mercy of the creature he most loathed. Talhajas arose, and I, half fearing, half anticipating his intentions, hurried to the winding runway which led to the floors below. No one was near to intercept me, and I reached the main floor of the chamber unobserved, taking my station in the shadow of the same column that Tars Tarkas had but just deserted. As I reached the floor, Talhajas was speaking.
Princess of Helium, I might wring a mighty ransom from your people, would I but return you to them unharmed. 1,000 times rather would I watch that beautiful face writhe in the agony of torture. It shall be long drawn out, but I promise you, 10 days of pleasure were all too short to show the love I harbor for your race. The terrors of your death shall haunt the slumbers of the red men through all the ages to come. They will shudder in the shadows of the night as their fathers tell them of the awful vengeance of the green men, of the power and the might and hate and cruelty of Talhajas. But before the torture, you shall be mine for one short hour, and word of that too shall go forth to Tardos Mors, Jedak of Helium, your grandfather, that he may grovel upon the ground in the agony of his sorrow. Tomorrow the torture will commence. Tonight thou art Talhasis. Come.
You. Yes, of course. The fat warlord of the Green Martians is, of course, a little rapey. Of course. Because why not? Not strictly necessary, but I guess if you need to inject some drama. He sprang down from the platform and grasped her roughly by the arm, but scarcely had he touched her. Then I leaped between them. My short sword, sharp and gleaming, was in my right hand. I could have plunged it into his putrid heart before he realized that I was upon him. But as I raised my arm to strike, I thought of Tarkus, and with all my rage, with all my hatred, I could not rob him of that sweet moment for which he had lived and hoped all these long, weary years. And so, instead, I swung my good right fist full upon the point of his jaw. Without a sound, he slipped to the floor as one dead. Oh, he found the off button. In the same deathly silence, I grasped Deja Thoris by the hand, and, motioning Sola to follow me, we sped noiselessly from the chamber and to the floor above, until we reached a rear window, and, with the straps and leather of my trappings, I lowered, first Sola, and then Deja Thoris, to the ground below. Dropping lightly after them, I drew them rapidly around the court in the shadows of the buildings, and thus we returned over the same course I had so recently followed from the distant boundary of the city. We finally came upon my thoats in the courtyard where I had left them, and, placing the trappings upon them, we hastened through the building to the avenue beyond. Mounting Sola upon one beast and Deja Thoris behind me upon the other, we rode from the city of thought through the hills to the south. Instead of circling back around the city to the northwest and around to the nearest waterway, which lay so short a distance from us, we turned to the northeast and struck out upon the mossy waste across which, for 200 dangerous and weary miles, lay another main artery leading to Helium. No word was spoken until we had left the city far behind. But I could hear the quiet sobbing of Deja Thoris as she clung to me with her dear head resting against my shoulder. If we make it, my chieftain, the debt of Helium will be a mighty one, greater than she can ever pay you. Should we not make it, she continued, the debt is no less, though Helium will never know, but you have saved the last of our line from worse than death. I did not answer, but instead reached to my side and pressed the little fingers of her I loved where they clung to me for support. And then, in unbroken silence, we sped over the yellow moonlit moss, each of us occupied with his own thoughts. For my part, I could not be other than joyful had I tried, with Deja Thoris's warm body pressed close to mine. And with all our unpassed danger, my heart was singing as gaily as though we were already entering the gates of Helium. Our earlier plans had been so sadly upset that we now found ourselves without food or drink, and I alone was armed. We therefore urged our beasts to a speed that must tell on them sorely, before we could hope to sight the ending of the first stage of our journey. We rode all night, and all the following day, with only a few short rests. On the second night, both we and our animals were completely fagged, and so we lay down upon the moss and slept for some 5 or 6 hours, taking up the journey once more before daylight. All the following day we rode, and when, late in the afternoon, we had sighted no distant trees, the mark of the great waterways throughout all Barsoom, the terrible truth flashed upon us. We were lost. Evidently we had circled, but which way it was difficult to say. Nor did it seem possible that with the sun to guide us by day and the moon and stars by night. At any rate, no waterway was in sight, and the entire party was almost ready to drop from hunger, thirst, and fatigue. Far ahead of us, and a trifle to the right, we could distinguish the outlines of low mountains. These we decided to attempt to reach, in the hope that from some ridge we might discern the missing waterway. Night fell upon us before we reached our goal, and almost fainting from weariness and weakness, we lay down and slept. I was awakened early in the morning by some huge body pressing close to mine, and opening my eyes with a start, I beheld my blessed old Woola snuggling close to me. The faithful brute had followed us across that trackless waste to share our fate, whatever it might be. Putting my arms about his neck, I pressed my cheek close to his. Nor am I ashamed that I did it, nor of the tears that came to my eyes as I thought of his love for me. Shortly after this, Dejathoris and Sola awakened, and it was decided that we push on at once in an effort to gain the hills. Good. I was almost very upset that he left his dog behind. His ugly, scary-looking Martian dog, but I was almost upset. You don't do that. Even if you're in the midst of a jailbreak, you take your dog with you. That's rule 1. Rule 1. Fiction, real life. Take care of the pupper. We had gone scarcely a mile when I noticed that my throat was commencing to stumble. My throat was commencing to stumble and stagger in a most pitiful manner, although we had not attempted to force them out of a walk since about noon of the preceding day. Suddenly, he lurched wildly to one side and pitched violently to the ground. Dejathoris and I were thrown clear of him and fell upon the soft moss with scarcely a jar. The poor beast was in a pitiable condition, not even being able to rise, although relieved of our weight. Sola told me that the coolness of the night when it fell, together with the rest, would doubtless revive him, and so I decided not to kill him, as was my first intention, as I had thought it cruel to leave him alone, there to die of hunger and thirst. Relieving him of his trappings, which I flung down beside him, we left the poor fellow to his fate, and pushed on with the one thoat as best we could. Sola and I walked, making Dejathoris ride, much against her will. In this way we had progressed within a mile of the hills we were endeavoring to reach, when Dejathoris, from her point of vantage upon the thoat, cried out that she saw a great party of mounted men filing down from a pass in the hills several miles away. Sola and I both looked in the direction she indicated, and there, plainly discernible, were several hundred mounted warriors. They seemed to be heading in a southwesterly direction, which would take them away from us. Hang on, before we continue. Didn't they establish that the thoats just ate the moss that is all around them? Like, just stop and let the thoat graze for a little bit. It'll be fine. What? They doubtless were Thark warriors who had been sent out to capture us, and we breathed a great sigh of relief that they were traveling in the opposite direction. Quickly lifting Dejathoris from the thoat, I commanded the animal to lie down, and we three did the same, presenting as small an object as possible, for fear of attracting the attention of the warriors toward us. We could see them as they filed out of the pass, just for an instant, before they were lost to view behind a friendly ridge, to us a most providential ridge, since, had they been in view for any great length of time, they scarcely could have failed to discover us. As what proved to be the last warrior came into view from the pass, he halted, and to our consternation, threw his small but powerful field glass to his eye, and scanned the sea bottom in all directions. Evidently, he was a chieftain, for in certain marching formations among the green men, a chieftain brings up the extreme rear of the column. As his glass swung toward us, our hearts stopped in our breasts. I could feel the cold sweat start from every pore in my body. Presently, it swung full upon us and stopped. The tension on our nerves was near the breaking point, and I doubt if any of us breathed for the few moments he held us covered by his glass. And then he lowered it, and we could see him shout a command to the warriors who had passed from our sight beyond the ridge. He did not wait for them to join him, however. Instead, he wheeled his throat and came tearing madly in our direction. There was but one slight chance, and that we must take quickly. Raising my strange Martian rifle to my shoulder, I sighted and touched the button which controlled the trigger. There was a sharp explosion as the missile reached its goal, and the charging chieftain pitched backward from his flying mount. Springing to my feet, I urged the throat to rise, and directed Sola to take Dejah Thoris with her upon him, and make a mighty effort to reach the hills before the green warriors were upon us. I knew that in the ravines and gullies they might find a temporary hiding place, and even though they died there of hunger and thirst, it would be better so than that they fell into the hands of the Tharks. Forcing my 2 revolvers upon them as a slight means of protection, and as a last resort as an escape for themselves from the horrid death which recapture would surely mean, I lifted Dejah Thoris in my arms and placed her upon the throat behind Sola, who had already mounted at my command. "Goodbye, my princess," I whispered. "We may meet in Helium yet. I have escaped from worse plights than this." And I tried to smile as I lied. "What?" she cried. "Are you not coming with us?" "How may I, Dejah Thoris? Someone must hold these fellows off for a while, and I can better escape them alone than could the 3 of us together." She sprang quickly from the throat, and, throwing her dear arms about my neck, turned to Sola, saying with quiet dignity, "Fly, Sola. Dejah Thoris remains to die with the man she loves." Those words are engraved upon my heart. Gladly would I give up my life 1,000 times, could I only hear them once again. But I could not then give even a second to the rapture of her sweet embrace, and pressing my lips to hers for the first time, I picked her up bodily and tossed her to her seat behind Sola again, commanding the latter in peremptory tones to hold her there by force. And then, slapping the throat upon the flank, I saw them borne away. Dejah Thoris struggling to the last to free herself from Sola's grasp. Turning, I beheld the green warriors mounting the ridge, and looking for their chieftain. In a moment, they saw him, and then me. But scarcely had they discovered me than I commenced firing, lying flat upon my belly in the moss. I had an even 100 rounds in the magazine of my rifle. Wow, really? Damn. And another 100 in the belt at my back. And I kept up a continuous stream of fire until I saw all of the warriors who had been first to return from behind the ridge either dead or scurrying to cover. My respite was short-lived, however, for soon the entire party numbering some 1,000 men, came charging into view, racing madly toward me. I fired until my rifle was empty, and they were almost upon me. And then, a glance showing me that Dejah Thoris and Sola had disappeared among the hills, I sprang up, throwing down my useless gun, and started away in the direction opposite to that taken by Sola and her charge. If ever Martians had an exhibition of jumping, it was granted those astonished warriors on that day long years ago. But while it led them away from Dejah Thoris, it did not distract their attention from endeavoring to capture me. They raced wildly after me until finally my foot struck a projecting piece of quartz, and down I went sprawling upon the moss. As I looked up, they were upon me, and although I drew my longsword in an attempt to sell my life as dearly as possible, it was soon over. I reeled beneath their blows, which fell upon me in perfect torrents. My head swam. All was black, and I went down beneath them to oblivion. All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 17 and the beginning of chapter 18, but we do only have a few minutes left. This is a short chapter, but I actually like this little bit of a cliffhanger to end for the night. So let's go ahead and set a bookmark and shift back to out of our reading nook. So, Dejah Thoris has declared her love for John Carter, and he's given up everything to help her and Sola escape. I was halfway expecting, like, Sola to be killed in the escape or something, as what they were referring to with the chapter title. So, I was happy to be wrong. Because after she had that big character development and reveal, I'm like, oh no, that's a flag. She's not long for this world. But was happily wrong in my diagnosis of the tropes at play. So, this was an interesting night of activity in the book. We've seen some development in other characters. We've seen some good and some bad development out of John. He's been adding a little bit of depth, but also he's kind of insufferable in some ways. So we'll see whether it's just that he's an idiot in love and develops some real character, or if he's just a Harry Stew out for ruining everyone's day. It could be a little bit of both. It could be. I wouldn't put it past him. This is, as far as books written just for like pulp fiction entertainment style goes, this is not the worst, but it's an early example. And as such, a lot of the tropes and depth and familiarity that we're used to seeing from like mainstream writings and mainstream books weren't really present in force. This is good storytelling, sure. Is it fun little world building? Absolutely. But it doesn't really stand up to things like Tolkien, or Song of Ice and Fire, or Dune, or the likes. This is firmly in the realm of pulp fiction, pulp science fiction, where it was good, but it was not meant to be high literature. And that's fine. Not everything needs to be high literature. Sometimes you need a turn off brain, enjoy sort of experience. And this fits the bill very nicely. Not to denigrate it at all. It's a fun book. But eyes wide open here. So, I'm, despite it all, still excited to see how things shape up. Because, now that he's been captured, presumably, given the way this story is being told, obviously he's not dead, because this is all told from an autobiographical stance. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you just want to have fun, and this is fine. Turn off brain, enjoy is valid entertainment. But yeah, so given that this is written from an autobiographical standpoint, we know he didn't die when he was just attacked by the remaining army of pursuers, but presumably captured and at the mercy, dubiously stated, of the Genak of the Thark. So, what will come next? Will he have been stripped of his medals? Or will he stand and find new honor in a different way? Will he rise through hierarchy in meteoric fashion and and go off to Helium to be reunited with his now absconded lover? We'll see. We'll see. We're getting the Kirk allegations, still not beating them. Still not beating them. Although I will say, given that this is so much before Kirk, I'm thinking, I wonder if this might have been some of the inspiration for that sort of template. Kind of. It might be. I'll have to look it up. All right. That gets us to a little after 10 tonight. So, let's go ahead and wrap up for the evening. It's been a fun read, and we'll have more of this to look forward to next time, when we return to continue our reading of A Princess of Mars on Friday, our next regularly scheduled reading. For those of you on YouTube, for those of you on YouTube, go ahead and like the stream, put a subscription on the channel. It helps the algorithm know that we're doing some fun things and sends new friends our way. Those of you on Twitch, if you haven't subscribed yet, or haven't followed yet, now's a great time. And I did, as of today, enable VODs on Twitch. As with Twitch, it only keeps 7 days, so you can catch up if you've missed a little bit, starting from tonight, but we absolutely can hopefully draw some more attention that way. And if you have a hankering for more readings, more classics of varying qualities, if you want to be frustrated by the myriad of Henrys who Akimos and I have both learned to loathe, you can find them on YouTube. I won't tell you where, because I don't particularly like Henrys. So, with that, let's go ahead and wrap up for the night. And until next time, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Good night.